Okay, so we are in the last stretch of our two-day workshop, and we're going to keep this super informal and fluid. I know a lot of people are having to go catch their flights, but I'll kick things off here, and then we'll have some good interaction, and then Diego and Ignacio is kind of bring everything to a close. So I just wanted to start off with there's actually a quiz that we'll tell you about. No! Sorry. So it's in your packet. Yeah. In your packet, we gave you the questionnaire results. So I'm gonna ask a question from there. I'll see who has the answer. You can look at it.
Oh, we can't look.
No. You can look at it. So it's about the importance of these cases related to tsunami. So you have to give me the top 3 most important use cases that the respondents here said, and it should not be in any order, but the top 3 of using the tsunami results in making decisions. So anybody can raise their hand or use a buzzer.
What are use cases?
How these are actually applied in decision making.
Evacuation route?
That's number 1. That's good. And you spoke a lot about it, so thank you. I don't think you did the survey. No, let me take it back. I'll let you go.
Survey.
Right, you didn't do the test, so you get not a passing grade. Okay, anybody else? Number 2. No? No, sorry. Nobody did the survey. We got good response. Well, you did, but you're making up your questions.
Months ago.
Okay. Community plan, yeah, there is this planning, economic impact analysis and planning, so okay, that gets a passing grade. And there's one more, top 3. There's a big one, and somebody spoke about it at length from a federal government agency. That's right. You guys did that right. All right. So, okay, anyways, thanks for that, and thanks for paying attention to your survey. So I'm gonna kick off, it's a question in terms of implementation. I mean, we've heard quite a bit from FEMA, from NOAA, from EPA, how these science could be translated in making decisions on building code. But we wanted to hear more. I mean, is there anything that kind of stood out? I mean, is the priority in terms of priority? What should we be thinking about? So I think it kind of relates to, the first of the question, what are we doing right now? Are we preserving or even improving? Anybody want to go first?
By the way, that's what is not the altimetry satellite for the geoscientists. Spread weakness, opportunities, threats.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very.
Education and outreach will save so many lives. That is worth preserving.
It's good. Yeah.
Logic trees.
Yeah, we should have something that, the polls, the millimeter poll, which kind of shows who's saying what. It's kind of a real-time tracker. Anybody else? Any comment or?
I don't know if this is current practice, but maybe more of a trend, something I heard yesterday. Somebody said, we're no longer thinking just inside the zone or outside the zone. So I thought that's, from what I've heard, maybe 15 years ago, that seemed to be it. It's like, here's the line, what side of it are you on? And now I think we're at least thinking like within this zone, there's going to be a lot of variation. So I don't know if it's current practice, but it seems to be a positive.
Yeah, I also wanted to remind, from my session where Dan and Ron and Gary talked about, some of the current baselines, and you talked about the importance of designing critical facilities better. Ron talked about the importance of, platforms, utilizing models to kind of disseminate the results to platforms. And then Gary talked at length about code. Does anybody want to comment on any of these ideas or expand on them?
As far as critical infrastructure is, if there is some codes that could be developed, that does help for us, for funders, to be able to fund things to that code. I know it works for us at EPA, it works for FEMA, and you can just, when you build back, or let's say you have a disaster of some sort, but if you want to build back to incorporate flooding and tsunamis and other types of things, it helps to have that code to be able to point to and say, well, this is really for protected, because our missions are to protect public health, really. And so it's consistent with that if you have those to refer to.
Maybe to add on to what David said, maybe it's a question to all of you. How important would it be to you, to the public, to the organizations you work with, to know that if you do spend a certain investment in trying to mitigate or to do better and so forth, what the return would be, what the benefits would be? Is that important to you? Okay, because it might help to sort of better explain and maybe justify, why these sorts of things need to be done. And I think that's really important. And I know that's, there have been a number of studies. I was involved with one a number of years ago where, for every dollar FEMA spent on mitigation, there was a $4 savings in the future from avoided losses. And that seems to have really picked up because, some of the things that David talked about, even for lifelines and utilities, they're using that again to try and put it in perspective, the amount of money that would be considered an investment. But there's a very large return, down the line. So you could either pay for it now or you pay for it later. If you pay for it later, it could be a lot more.
Okay, anybody else would like to comment on that? Okay,
I have a microphone. Oh, not convenient. I wanna not answer that question that Ron asked, but maybe ask a similar question which came up in a call with Shubarup and Gary Chalk when we were planning this. And he said, and I'm gonna try to paraphrase and respect what he was saying. He said that he had found in recent times that making the argument of what that cost savings would be, he was no longer finding traction. He was no longer getting traction with that argument, that the idea of cost benefit analysis was no longer working with motivating people to get vertical evacuation structures, to change building code and so on. And so he was making the argument that what he thought needed to happen is that we needed to start speaking about this as a simple moral imperative. This needs to get done because otherwise it's going to be very bad in terms of loss of life. And so from his perspective, that wouldn't work anymore, Ron. And that's just one perspective, I get that, but I wanted to put that to the room because I thought that was really interesting, that dollars and cents wasn't the right argument, that the right argument was good or bad. And so I don't know how others feel about that. And I see Jonathan immediately raising his hand.
I think that's a great point, and probably the best example I could think of that actually seems to support that argument is what happened in Seaside with their high school. High school was in the inundation zone. The community recognized the risks. They actually worked with George Priest and Rob Witter to do some of the initial modeling to figure out, what the impact was going to be and where to put a new high school. And the same effects were happening just down the road at Cannon Beach. And, so the results came out and you need to move it to high ground somewhere safe outside of the zone. And the community spent a number of years, actually almost probably 10 or 12 years, fighting to get the funding to support moving that high school. And in the end, what it came down to was not so much doing the cost benefit type analysis. It was getting the high school kids out into the community, advocating, for moving the school or advocating in front of the legislature to get it to high ground. That eventually actually led to passing of 2 bond measure attempts. It was the second one that actually was eventually successful, but it was a lot of hard work done in the community trying to persuade people that, at the end of the day, it's your kids' lives here that matter, and safety is up the hill there. And, by the way, one of the local landowners is providing land for free. If you guys kick in the money to pay for the building of the school, we can do it. And it eventually worked. So there are different examples out there like that.
I think somebody.
I agree that, the way in which you justify things have gotten very complex. But when you think about some of the mitigation studies that FEMA, evaluates in terms of funding, it gets very, very comprehensive in terms of what the benefits are. I think everything, regardless of what you say, I think everything comes down in large part to finances. Okay, if you think about, I think it was, how many of you know Yume Wong, right? A lot of you do, Oregon. She was telling me that, one of the impediments for lifelines or for utility owners is that, they are hesitant, to do things that seem obvious, to do the right thing, because of possible liability issues. And, and she had indicated to me, I believe that was the case, that in Oregon, she worked very hard with the legislators to make sure that these operators, had some sort of protection from that they, could do the right things, and that they could be in some way, protected from any sort of, liability there. I think that's, that I hadn't heard about that, and I think it's an important lesson, something that, kind of changed my mind, my at least perspective on things. But it's very hard, I think, to quantify or to not quantify, to make the case, unless you begin to get into things that are dealing with numbers, at least in my opinion.
Okay. Any other comment on that? Otherwise, I'm gonna, yeah, I was gonna introduce a completely new topic, but thank you. So, I have one comment about the second one, what elements in current practice shall be improved. So in this early afternoon, we have someone, there's a topic talking about the land use. However, since we didn't see any presentations that talk about the land use population growth in their modeling, right? Of the risk assessment and mitigations. Apparently, this is important. That because for the existing populations, we can build hard structures, for example, the defense seawall to prevent or mitigate these tsunamis. But by the way, maybe relocation, or of course, there is a lot of policy issues and preference. But we can communicate with maybe because this relocation can solve problem fundamentally. Just relocate out of the hazard zone, for example. For the new populations, we have the capacity issue. And also for those ones, maybe either that because you can, we can control the land use maybe, and then it's either to just construct the buildings out the hazard zones. So we do the modelings, we use it for future. So we need to consider these changes in the land use, in the population growth in our modelings to reflect the future. So I think that maybe one when seeing we need to improve. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's a gap, that's well identified, and I don't think, I'm sure a lot of people in this room are actually thinking about the problem. Maybe it wasn't presented, because of, the topic.
Yeah, and so, state of California, we just had, about 6 or 8 weeks ago, had our first meeting with the Humboldt County Planning Department and the city of Arcata and Eureka to, explain, because we have the PTHA results for, 72, 100, 200, 475, 975, 2475, 3000 on our website. But they, were, using the evacuation maps and not the inundation model results. And so I had the first workshop to sort of explain what the PTHA model results are, and that they may want to use those data to help constrain their planning. And we plan on expanding this to other lead agencies around the state. So this was our first try at that.
Kind of pass on this side. Anybody from this side?
Yeah, okay, I heard it. Okay. So I have another idea related with this discussion about the mitigation, because it seems that sometimes we have hard data, which is basically showing that actually we have to do something. But there are so many other conflicts that probably we will not be able to do that. Actually, a couple of minutes ago, I was talking with David about, okay, if you have a utility in a certain place, it will be very hard that you will go and put the utility in a high zone, because it's just putting a kind of pumps to pump the thing. It's just too expensive. So it will be there. If we are talking about tsunami, maybe with hurricane, people will finally decide to do something. So according to that, and actually this is pretty similar to what I think about climate change and the effects, is that actually as scientists, engineers, and emergency planners, we need to think about all these cascading effects and trying to learn how to model cascading effects of things that we are not doing, because the option of not doing anything is real because of all the conflicts that we have. So when we are addressing problems with modeling, for example, the cascading effect part probably would be an important topic. Yeah, especially, for example, debris, talking about debris with them.
Okay. Then immediate response.
One thing we could do different too is to put tsunami risk, even earthquake risk, in context of other risks that people face either individually or, say the mayor of a town or something like that. I think when we were debating our evacuation structure for OSU, I think we lost sight of the fact that, buildings can catch on fire, students can, have accidents out on the road. Like, I think we got so high centered on just the tsunami and how high is it and whose model is right. I think we lost the sense of like, what is the risk relative to, say parents sending a kid to college in the first place. So I think we need to put our risk in context of either other hazards or just day-to-day risk, so that people can make a decision like their willingness to accept a certain level of risk or not.
Karina.
Yeah, I had the same thought a while ago. We had a workshop through the NTHMP talking about how to communicate probabilities and like, can we compare, 2,500 to your chance of being struck by lightning or a shark attack or, other things that people might be afraid of. And we had Sarah McBride from USGS come and talk to us about like comparing hazards, and I think it was Sarah McBride, yeah. And how do you share that information? And her recommendation was, do not do that. Because everybody perceives it's not so much based on facts. Like I could tell you, her example was that like every year in the US, 25 times more people die from cows than sharks. And even knowing that, they're still more afraid of sharks. And so like, it really doesn't necessarily matter what you're comparing it to, because your own personal fears or risk tolerances play into that. And so, I think there's social science behind that and figuring out how to communicate that is important. But anyway, I thought that was a funny story, because I agree, I'm still more afraid of sharks.
Good question. How do they die because of cows by eating or?
Yeah.
Oh, ranching. Anyways, I wanna, is that okay? I ask make one more comment before I pass it on to you. So I wanted to, kind of talk a little bit about risk, well, yeah, I was a good talk. The risk perception and communication, and maybe it has some bearing here as well, because the example that I think about is a little bit more international, because we have done some projects for the World Bank where they go into countries with a lot of risk, multi-hazard risk, and try to introduce risk products, insurance products. And if they try to sell it as a regular, oh, this is an insurance that you need to buy, you pay a premium, people are really opposed to that. I mean, everybody hates insurance, right? Nobody wants to buy insurance, especially, in Asia and Africa. It's, because of the way it's operated, there is a very negative view of insurance. But the way they do it is, it's not directly connected to a decision that is subjective. So they make it more quantifiable parameter, like, okay, there's such and such ground shaking, you get this amount of money. And it's clear, and they point to some, credible source that says, okay, if USGS says there's ground shaking of this magnitude, no matter, if you're within the zone, you get a payout, or if it's wind, and things that are, quantifiable easily. So I was thinking, just looking at, Ankit's presentation and the previous one where, the planning and engineering and the decision that are factored into, designing these sorts of products that, and he was talking about, why is there such a huge gap? Is there any way to kind of design these products? I know FEMA's thinking about, right? Some parametric type of stuff for flood and wind. Is there an opportunity to kind of use more quantifiable, transparent measures to provide cover for tsunami, for example? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Oh,
It's actually more a concern than a thought or a solution. But when I was hearing the presentation on insurance, that was interesting for me because the 2011 tsunami was already so long ago, and scientists and engineers still struggle to understand how those surveys presented that damage. And until today, it's very difficult to disaggregate the effects of the earthquake and the effects of the tsunami, because in the end, we just saw a structure that was damaged or collapsed. So for me, it's very interesting to understand how insurance companies are deciding what to pay to who, because if you have an insurance for earthquake and there's a tsunami, that will be so easy to say something like, well, this was a tsunami, I have nothing to do with this. So it's very interesting for me because in the science community, we are still trying to characterize what happened. And there are already these insurance policies that say, this is for flooding, this is for earthquake, this is for tsunami. So it's just a thought.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the insurance person here,
Yeah.
but the earthquake thing is probably a more straightforward issue, because there's a lot of sensors, there's a lot of data
Yeah.
that come out immediately, and people are actually doing it. There are examples in California. That's our earthquake product.
To your point about the parametric insurance, so like Subshu Group was talking about earlier, it's a quicker way to propagate insurance more efficiently. It's based on not all these sophisticated probabilities, is based on one intensity metric. So what it says is, if your tsunami, for example, if your tsunami is, let's say, higher than this much depth, you get the full payout, whether you get damage or not. So it's a new product. People like it because it's fast and quick, but I still am a little skeptical because intensity might not correlate to damage. So, but it's a step in the door, like you said, to start the conversation about increasing the protection gap we talked about.
One of the unintended consequences might be, well, then I don't really have to worry about building the code, because I know you're gonna pay out. So you could, yeah, I'm just gonna do it the cheapest way I can.
Well, there will be preconditions, of course, right?
Just saying. There are a lot of states where maybe roads are not necessarily enforced.
All right, I think go. Diego, do you want to take the next set of questions?
Also, because we know that a few people, several of you are leaving early, we've made the editorial decision to end the meeting at 3:30, which I'm sure not a lot of people will object to. We have that to look forward to. We wanted to turn your attention to the same kind of conversation, but about the science bits and pieces that we've been hearing about earlier yesterday and throughout the day about PTHA and so forth. And talk about what needs to be included soon because it's urgently needed. And what science should we focus on today to improve risk assessments and to influence design and policy. And I'll give one example that I was thinking about during Jay and Jonathan's session. Academics are not good at a lot of things. We think we're good at everything, but there's a lot we're not good at. But one thing we're really good at is writing proposals to get supercomputer time. So I listened to your 32,000 sources. I'm like, running 32,000 inundation models up and down the West Coast is not hard.
Yeah.
The codes are there. We just have to set up the bathymetry files and press go and wait for the computer to do its thing. And with the size of the community in this room that's represented between state and federal agencies and academics, and so we write that proposal in a day, and I think it's a slam dunk of a proposal. So my mind's already thinking we should just do this to turn the Powell Center effort into full-on probabilistic inundation models. So that's an example of something I think we can do right now, and so we can move from the 100-meter depth contour to full inundation, and we could do all sorts of good with that. Right? What else? What else can we think of? Yeah.
This is just to follow sort of what you just
She
said.
raised her
Oh, I'm
hand.
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. It's just a comment on high performance computation. Having the computation may be a step away from writing a proposal, but you also need the codes to be prepared to run in HPC. So it's not only to have the computer, your codes must have the scalability to run on so many clusters at the same time. So that's an extra challenge.
Of course, yeah, point taken.
Yeah, so I'm not one of the modelers, but what I see is, something that is starting to click into place, but we need to really keep pushing hard on is that the models start from the beginning and go all the way through to the end using handoffs and feedbacks back and forth so that it's not different efforts taking different parts of it. So what I mean is, from the fault models to the slip and the seafloor displacement to the deep water tsunami propagation to the inundation model to the digital twin of the community where everything is being handed off back and forth and there's crosstalk in both directions of those. That's a grand goal perhaps for us, but that seems like the right thing.
Yeah, Matt. To jump off of that, Harold, for the ASCE effort and this wonderful Powell Center work, right? That was Stephanie Ross, USGS, wrote this grant to get the Powell Center workshop, to get the time, to get all these people together, which is fabulous. And then what, right? And so this is the first time all of these groups have come together to build this consensus for PTHA, which is wonderful. And hopefully pieces of that will be implemented in ASCE 28, which will come out in 28, but won't be adopted by states and territories till 2032, right? And so then the next version of that build, and then so it won't go into practice till like 2035 for some buildings probably. And so this takes a very long time. And so it's really important for people to publish their work and get it out there into the community and share it with, people who are making decisions, but then, to continue to fund efforts like the Powell Center so that there is we can continue to upgrade the models because a lot of the information that's in there may be outdated next year. And so how do we continue to incorporate the best available science? And that we rely on people to publish work and share work so that it can continue down the road.
I would say that this joint seismic tsunami question and whether it's done combined or if because there's already a shake map, that they're just gonna use that anyway. But some thought to like how the results would be used for multi-hazard analysis.
Humble opinion from a first year master's student. During all the workshop, we have discussed how uncertainty is in every step of our models, simulations. And I have seen very fancy, complex models, really impressive. But I think that as we grow in complexity in the models, we should also focus on obtaining better quality in the data so that we can also have a more confidence in the results that we obtain from the models. So I think that should be something that we can focus on.
Okay, I was gonna speak precisely to that. I think you took the words out of my mouth. I guess in a bit of a self-serving way, I believe that we still need quite a bit of data to properly verify that we can have from this probabilistic hazard that we can get a credible probabilistic risk. I would, in terms of Cascade, for example, we haven't had a tsunami in 300 years, but the risk is fairly high, and it would be rather important in my estimation to have whatever model we do use to have something that is credible in Cascadia. And currently, what we validate on generally tends to be the few data sets that we have, which are generally total and a little bit of power. But we do have a fair record of tsunamis in South America that we could tap into, and I guess that if there's availability, if there's a community effort, whether we could get this kind of sort of structural data sets that I think Dan was talking about with the tax rate, maybe not as detailed as the tax rate was, but like, you know, start compiling a more local data set so we can perhaps start increasing the distribution of data available to us to then move on to the next step.
Maybe.
Yeah, kind of going back to what Dan was saying on the joint seismic and tsunami hazards. I know there was at this point, like 2 years ago, a Shake Alert R&D meeting, and somebody made a comment about, oh, it'd be interesting to know a bit more about the tsunami hazards. So we kind of have the same comments, but from the other side here. So I feel like there's often very limited overlap on the earthquake meetings and the tsunami meetings. So if there's a way in the future to have this
Over
but
there.
still, like double the size and have the other half with us, then it might help us to solve some of these problems.
Volcanologist.
Thanks, Amy.
I know this is already being worked on and that it's complicated, but from emergency management perspective, what I really look forward to are advances in debris modeling and sediment transport. Cause that's the stuff that we get questions and we are kind of just like, wait until we know more. So those are two that I think will, really advance things on the planning side at the very least. We also get questions about sashing. I know that's not going to be applicable everywhere, but we do get people asking us, what's going to happen in Lake Washington? What's going to happen at the locks? And we're also kind of like, don't be there when it happens.
So I'll go back to one of the comments I made yesterday, I think was, and that is sensitivity testing. I think that's still really critical at this stage, especially with these updates in the logic tree. I think there's a lot of elements there that'd be really good to see what sort of relative role they have in terms of reducing or affecting these hazard curves. We've touched on tides, we've touched on bathymetry. Those are elements that are part of the PTHA process, but I think we really struggle, at least the end users really struggle to know what are the relative contributions of those uncertainties to the end product, and do they really make a difference? And so better understanding that type of sensitivity in all these different elements, I think is something that, I think we're in the position now where we can do that. It just is going to take a lot of modeling work to implement it.
This was just a quick comment to respond to Alyssa, but the need also for dynamic rupture models, which will also help with looking at stage hazards in certain bays where they exist, is very important as well.
With the shaking associated with them.
From the dynamic models.
Yeah.
I feel like that's happened like.
I know.
I brushed my hair back.
I wanted to make a comment that could be a little controversial with this group, but at a certain point, we've got an idea of what this tsunami is going to create, and to try to get to the level of accuracy, maybe extra effort when we know the kind of population that's going to be affected. It's probably, no more than 100,000 on each coast, right? Probably. It's relatively small, and maybe our efforts really need to be engaging with the seaside and engaging with ocean view shores, and beginning to take some of those lessons about engagement with those communities to find out how they want to deal with the overall risk, and what are the 1 or 2 or 3 actions that they might need to take, being able to prepare to go up to higher elevations. Where is that elevation generally? Or these evacuation towers or something else. But just for, we're concerned about your overall livability through this type of disaster. And there are a few things that we can help with, and funding that can be done. But we approximately know, we don't know exactly, but so that we focus a bit more on that personal engagement side with the communities, and find out what their needs are to go forward.
Yeah, so speaking of science, we're good at earth science, climate science, this kind of science. But I would like to mention data science. I may not give a very accurate definition, but for data, apparently our modelings, validations, risk assessment, analysis, whatever, we want more sufficient and high quality data, but I don't think we are satisfied with our data collections and the data analysis. For example, for the data, the hazards itself, or the infrastructures, or the populations, percentages, a lot of these things, do we really get the high quality data? So in other words, is some problem with, there may be some problem with data availability, data accessibility, data quality. Those are very important. And also we will models, building these models, and we use them to design and for policy meetings, for example, the mitigations. We also need considers the data with consistency across regions. For example, when we develop the national risk index across different states in the US, we may have some problem with consistency because due to the problems with data accessibility or the data availabilities in different states. There might be also problem with across countries. As I think Aon and the European companies may be very interested in these things. That's because
You mentioned high fidelity models, but high fidelity models apparently is rely on the high quality data, and also how to use this data consistently across countries. That's because the matters your insurance, the investment, how to the investment, your money, wisely. Thank you.
I think we have to put a lot of effort on science communication for politicians. I think we talk about a lot about the communities exposed. We also talk about the scientists or the technical entities, but we don't think about politicians. I think we don't like them in general. That's true. That's true. And to be honest, I think that most of scientists think that the politicians are not smart enough, and that's a problem because that generates some kind of rejection from them. So I think we need to do that through science communication, and we really need to find strategies to tell them what is happening and how they can help. Because even if we work with communities, the final decision is on them, on the politicians. So I think we have to work on that too, and that's part of the science thing.
So we made it to the last 20 minutes of the last day without talking about politics. But I agree, extremely important, yeah.
I have one brief comment about scientific development, or is that there are places, there are tsunami sources that we know little about, and these contribute to our tsunami hazards. And so that's something that we need academics to do, is focus on those places that we lack capacity of, recurrence information, seismic data. Because right now, the most complicated logic tree that we have in the world is Cascadia, and it's because we have, it's a rich data set. And so if we could increase the data that we have for these other tsunami sources, that would help a lot.
Are you talking about in other subduction zones and their rates and things like that? Or are you talking about other tsunamigenic sources like volcanoes, meteor tsunamis, landslides?
Both. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a reason we didn't talk about landslides and volcanoes at this meeting. That wasn't an omission. That was undeliberate. Yeah, Sean?
I think something that we should probably be working towards is 5 good benchmark cases, or a subset of very good benchmark cases that combine and sort of act as a conduit between probabilistic and deterministic scenarios. So whatever those cases end up being, something that serves as here's our best guess right now that we can just continue working at, so that we can communicate this towards non-scientific audiences. So we have the t-shirt models, and now we know that those probably aren't going to be very good representations of reality, but we probably shouldn't abandon the framework that they set forth. We should select maybe a set of extreme cases that span what we think might happen, or the 5 most likely cases, or different things that we can offer towards emergency managers and politicians. Like, this is our best guess right now for what could happen. And I think we should focus on that first, towards that.
Thank you.
There's an organization based in London. It's called Lloyd's Realistic Disaster Scenarios. I heard someone smiling, so maybe they're familiar. So they do publish these cases. I know they have some scenarios, like you said, like worst case, and then likely, and then less likely for earthquake. I'm not sure about tsunami, but it's out there. Definitely should be thinking more about tsunami, and I'll also encourage about fire following, like liquefaction, landslides too. So good point.
I think Aaron can advocate for that to Lloyd's.
So one last thing for me, I hope, maybe not, I don't know. Okay, so everyone, we talk about probabilistic tsunami modeling, but there is no such thing as probabilistic tsunami modeling. So we use thousands of sources to develop, a hazard curve, and then we use deterministic sources to match that hazard curve. So all of our inundation models are all actually deterministic sources. And so over the next decade, it would be great if we could do something to really create a real probabilistic tsunami inundation model.
I'm gonna turn it over to Ignacio, Karina, in a second. For me, what I just heard these last 2 days are that the hazard modeling has improved so much that some people are asking us to stop. I heard that, but I don't think I would have heard that 25 years ago, so that's good.
Yeah.
But where I had heard a lot of weaknesses are still in the exposure and in the fragility modeling, right? So thinking as the middle manager that I am now, what I hear is we need validation efforts like we had for the hydrodynamic codes, for the fragility approaches, for the data sets to validate them and so on and so forth, so that we can get there to that point. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so now we will go into the last section, and here, rather than think about what we have and what we should have, I want to try to invite you to go to the future, but that future in which actually we are trying to imagine some science that we haven't even developed yet, and we can implement in a new technology. So the first two questions are, what science needs to be solved? What is your wish list to solve, to have better tools in the future? So this is very, very, very open question and almost crazy. Basically, try to tell me what you think we should try to imagine the science in the future. What industry agencies should do or may do to improve the current practice of tsunami hazard assessment, okay, but thinking, for example, 30 years more, okay, so super open question. And finally, which is also related with the future, what do you think in a university, for example, we should do developing the new workforce for the new generations? What we should do, for example, in our courses, what we really need to get to do better in terms of, for example, courses for senior students. We should put more probability, more computational science, etc. So let's try to go to the future now. So comments.
My comment was on the last one, but I do have an idea for this one. But I just want to say for the PTHA and going forward, one question or science question that I have is, all of this goes to the 100-meter BAFI, and then it's modeled inland, but what I think I've heard from Gary and others is 100-meter BAFI was just made up. There's no evidence that really suggests that that is the place we should be modeling from. And so that is a science question I have, and especially in places like Washington, where you have the Strait of Georgia and the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the 100-meter BAFI goes all over the place, and that doesn't really work for tsunami modeling. It was made for for Oregon and Hawaii and places like that. So that's a question I have. What is that line, that ICOBAF that should be used, or should that be the method going forward? So that's a question for you. But for what science needs to solve better tools in the future, a lot of what we focus on now is like the earthquake part of it. But when we're thinking about tsunamis, it's really a water problem. And so the water is the tsunami. And so how do we better observe the changes to the ocean? Like, we have DART, we have for bottom pressure tsunami detection, but how do we increase our ocean detecting systems to better observe and then forecast for the tsunami and then alert for it in a time that gives people enough time to do something about it, because we don't have that capability.
I guess taking Dan's comment about a sort of fully integrated earthquake, tsunami, model. I mean, I would say take it to the next level and go incorporate dynamic tides, incorporate sea level rise, and then make it fully three-dimensional. And be able to actually integrate updates from changes in bathymetry easily as they become available in the future, and then running obviously everything we've talked about here thousands of times.
Overall, the bathymetry. in the 100. Oh my goodness. Maybe we can be. Okay, well, first,
I don't
no
know.
question.
I'd like to tackle number two, if I can leapfrog to that, is that okay? Number two, can I?
Yeah,
ask
for
that?
sure.
All right, and I want to do that by getting back to John's, question, or maybe the challenge that he had. You know, I think because of the paucity data that we, that exists, for trying to do things like characterizing, the effects of, tsunamis and so forth, we rely a lot on simulation models. This is one of the points I want to make. You mentioned, sensitivity analyses being very important from a couple, perspectives. One being that maybe you don't need, 100,000 different scenarios. Maybe you can reduce it down to maybe a more manageable set that replicates probably the majority of risk, whatever it is that you're looking at. So my question to you is that in order for you to do that, you kind of need to focus on what that outcome, what you're trying to measure. Are you trying to measure, for example, say, financial losses? Are you trying to target, better evacuation planning? All these things involve, various models that have uncertainties and so forth. And I think that it's only when you get to the tail end where you're sampling from all the different models and, trying to adjust for the uncertainties and the uncertainties in each of the models that you finally get to that end point. And you might find that certain things that you thought were very important, really don't have a large impact because, it's just not, it's not driving or triggering, those final results. So my question to you is that when you were talking about outcomes and wanting to use that as a means of perhaps maybe prioritizing and targeting where you spend your investment, what outcomes were you talking about?
So, first and foremost, I had a purely sort of scientific interest in understanding when we are running all these various simulations and we're making tweaks and adjustments to different elements of the logic tree branches, that we actually understand what those implications are to the end result, which is the hazard curve. How much does it actually change the shape? And then using obviously high quality benchmarking type data to do further validation, because one of the concerns, I was talking to Sean about this yesterday, is that you can run many different scenarios and produce many different hazard curves for a single point, but that ends up having a massive spread. What is reality versus what is reasonable? So what is reasonable versus what is, to the more of the unlikely, improbable end. And somehow we got to converge on what is going to be most meaningful and how to get there. So I guess there's some sensitivity testing that needs to be done to figure out that side of it. In terms of who the end user is and how it might be used, I mean, it depends. Althea would argue that it's about life safety. So we want to make sure that we've got the most credible, largest scenario covered, and that then we're planning from an evacuation standpoint, we're doing all our evacuation modeling based on that. If you're designing for vertical evacuation structures, we want to make sure that we're not underestimating that 2475-year design wave, which I think in some cases in Oregon, we may be doing right now. And that could have profound implications when you build something that it's not high enough. I mean, we saw that happen in Japan. So we need to make sure we're meeting these different requirements, the AASHTO design requirements and things like that. So it all depends on the users, but I think first and foremost, we need to know what the implications are for, as we build these logic trees and model the response, we can see how the hazard curves change. We need to understand what those effects are.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that we have logic trees as well that, go beyond the hazard, fragility.
Yeah.
Even, Katsu talked about, building inventories, there's uncertainties there.
Yeah.
So we got logic truth as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back to potential science, new science in the future. So I was talking with Pat Lynette about this, and he thinks that we're maybe a decade out of being able to do this. And so instead of having, we have our hazard curve, and that can be a hazard curve for amplitude, velocity, momentum, flux. We could have hazard curves for these different parameters. And so the idea is to be able to take the hazard curves at whatever isobath you choose. And it doesn't have to be an isobath, and it can vary along the shoreline, especially in Washington or Alaska and all the fjords. And then take the hazard curve at each of those points, and instead of using a deterministic source to match the hazard curve, because that's still subjective, because you have to choose a model that fits 100 different points or 1,000 points for wherever you're doing your inundation modeling, is if there were a way to start with the amplitude, velocity, momentum, flux at those points as the initial condition for remodeling. And that's something that I think would be a great advance.
I just want, nobody said machine learning yet. And so I think for one, things like generative AI or physics informed neural networks can solve that. And so I think the way to 1 million inundation models goes through machine learning. There's no other way. We're never going to actually simulate with shallow water equations and reduce and ask or whatever 1 million inundation models. So I think that for one, that's the obvious one for me. Yeah. That.
Changing topics a little bit to again, it's I guess I make a pitch for the lifeline infrastructure. So we have a ton of information about buildings, but very little about the things that communities are going to need to recover. So power, water, there's stuff about islanding and being connected to the valley and other places, and communications. I think those network infrastructures are important, how they are together, but yeah, I think this PTHA can help because there may be, not for life sake in the 2500 year, but maybe designing around the 500 year, communities can afford to, harden up some of the factors.
This side.
So, I'm only half joking, but, prediction, I'm an emergency manager. Tell me when the next earthquake and tsunami is going to be.
I just got handed a mic, so I'll say sometime between 3:30 this afternoon and 500 years from now. Maybe not, because it could go longer than 500 years. Yeah. Wow, that threw me, so I can't remember what, I know what I was gonna say. Something that, that came up during the course of this meeting, but we haven't said in this thing, is the non-stationarity in time of what the potential impact on communities is, because relative sea level is changing, and it's changing in different ways for different places. So I just wanted to mention an effort that's going on in the COPES Hub that nobody's talked about yet. David Schmidt and his postdoc, or recent postdoc, Jay Kim and Anna Pearson, have been doing vertical land elevation change models. So they know the present day from all the geodesy and everything like that, projected into the future, right? With the locking models and everything incorporated into them. And then also use static sea level rise or, local, so create true local relative sea level rise at any point along our coast. And then they're saying, okay, what happens if the earthquake takes place and land level drops or rises or stays neutral, depending on where it is, again, in the locking model, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 75 years from now. And so they're creating probabilistic statements that at the community planner level, they can actually use to say, if we're looking at our 50-year plan, we can at least use some information about how likely it is that the land will just keep going down relative to sea level by X number of tens of centimeters during that whole time. We'll have a sudden drop, we'll have a sudden rise. And that's different for Nia Bay versus Southern Oregon and places in between. So that effort is, and what they're trying to do is do all of that with an eye towards producing a product that you know, somebody who's at the level of like the city manager for Westport, Washington can actually understand and use as part of input to all of that. So all that's way outside my world, but I feel like that kind of product is at least what those guys are saying. Yeah, we can actually, that helps us to know not just what it is today, but like how that projects into the future.
I can build on what Harold was just talking about. There's a lot of folks, there's folks at NOAA and all across the country, lots of practitioners that are working on coastal inundation. There's a coastal inundation community of practice that we really had to fight to get a tsunami person at. And I just think that, you know, all these folks who are working on storm surge modeling and sea level rise and tsunami, we all need to be talking to each other because, you know, like the example Karina gave about bridge retrofitting, there's a lot of opportunities for communities that are doing risk assessment planning to also consider tsunami and not have tsunami at least just sort of be in its own little silos. So that was my Sea Grant hat.
So perfect. So thank you. Actually, you steal my idea for the final speech, actually. But this is beautiful because I can give continuity from what you said.
Yeah.
So actually, this meeting was all about this. People who is thinking about, for example, problem with astrology in the evacuation plan can understand that, for example, there is possibility of a spray fall. We have to update the slab geometry. We need to understand what is the kinematic coupling in a source. And the people who are doing inversion from the geologic point of view now can understand how this seed information is finally ended up in a tsunami fragility function, which actually need data. And everybody in this area have different challenges. The happy thing of this meeting is now everybody can understand what the other people is doing and what are actually the challenges they are having. Because when we do that, we can finally try to fill this gap that we think we have had for many years. First of all, we can acknowledge that we were having people doing a lot of work in other side that probably we were not so aware. We are not expecting that everybody will do models of everything, but at least we can acknowledge the efforts that we are doing in all this bridge that is going from hazard to risk, which was the name of the workshop. So probably I think we accomplished that in this meeting. One of the outcomes was very open with Diego because we were saying, okay, we can try to set questions here. But actually the question will come from you, and the answer or the idea of how we can answer in the future will be the things that we will do now. So I'm very happy with what we have achieved in these 2 days. I think everybody have an idea about what every sector is doing in this program, and probably that is the first starting point, so we can start to develop an integral solution for all this. So a very great applause for all of you, and yeah, this is it, and now I can pass to you.
All right, very few housekeeping things before we are all released. Please, round of applause for all the wonderful staff. Jill, Kronos, the timekeeper, aka Loic. Andy, and everybody who put this together, it just did a lot of work. And Ignacio and Dan and Shubaru for the organizing committee. We have some special swag for you guys that none of the other attendees got, just you guys. And I want to say 2 things to you. I got into tsunamis and large earthquakes because of the Tohoku earthquake. It happened when I was in graduate school, and I rushed down to beer hour that week at Scripps, and I was very excited. Because I told people this is my PhD thesis, and this earthquake will be amazing. Okay. And that excitement quickly waned when I realized that 20,000 people had died and that there had been countless economic losses. And so I think that's what happens to a lot of us, at least for me. Earthquakes and tsunamis are a little like flames to a pyromania. There's a fundamental sense of awe with the phenomenon and what it means and what is happening in the earth, and it's beautiful to contemplate, but
it's tough. We hear about Tofino was $600 million in losses. In Ocean Shores, it was $7 billion in losses. In Seaside, it was $1 billion in losses. 7,000 lives there, 5,000 lives here, and yeah, the excitement goes away, right? So what I want to leave you with is to take care of yourselves, because this is heavy, heavy work. And I also want to tell you that I see you, and I'm thankful for all your efforts, because to go through that whole processing chain that Ignacio describes takes passion to do this work. You guys are passionate. Thank you.
We're done. We are done.